So we're continuing our companions on the journey, or sharing our journey. And I thought long and hard about inviting the person that I invited today. I mean that in a very positive way, because Stelli has so many gifts and she's sometimes so quiet. And I wanted a chance to let her speak for herself with you. And so Stelli, would you come up and sit with me? Thank you. And by the way, we did not rehearse the answers before we came. So if I get surprised, just kind of hold that for me. So tell me again about growing up and your heritage of birth. Yeah, where you were born and
Okay. So I was born in Managua, Nicaragua, in 1972. My mom was in the States studying English and getting ready to go to college, and she met my father in New Orleans. And it was really important to her to for me to be Nicaraguan, for me to be born there. So she went back there in order to have me. And it was November 1st. They had intended to stay through Christmas, because that was a very important time to her and her family. And my great grandfather was born on Christmas Eve, so it was a very big tradition. And 2 days before Christmas, my dad was really acting out, saying, "I want to go home. I want to go home. I want to go home," and driving her crazy. So finally, she said, "Okay, we'll go home." And 2 days later, a massive earthquake destroyed Managua. The whole wall where my crib was crumbled and crashed the crib, and my grandmother broke her leg trying to get out of the rubble. So it was a miracle that we left in time, and that my dad was such a jerk that day. But I was raised in the States, but I spent a lot of time going back and forth between the US and Nicaragua, because again, my mom wanted me to make sure that I was very close with my family there. Is that it?
Yeah, I think part of what I find interesting about that story, beyond just knowing that at Stelli, is so many people come to the United States to have their children born here, to be a citizen here, yet Stelli's mom, your mom, decided that it was important that you be born there. So that means that Stelli was an immigrant and had to become a citizen, even though she had her father as a U.S. citizen. You had your father as a U.S. citizen. You had to become a citizen later.
Yeah, my parents were young. My dad was 17 when I was born. My mom was 18. Neither of their parents were happy that they got pregnant so young, because they were getting ready to start school and everything. So it was a big deal. But apparently, when I was born, it changed everything, and they were all happy. So yeah.
Okay. So growing up being born in Managua and in the United States, tell us about your spiritual heritage, like what it was like at home for you with your mother.
So my mom, Nicaragua is a Catholic country, so she grew up in that context. But in the States, I remember us going to church from time to time. My dad was an atheist, so that kind of was different between them. But I learned over time as I got older, and my parents got divorced when I was 12. So after they were divorced, and when you're divorced, you're supposed to not take communion. There are all these rules in the Catholic faith. And she'd be like, "Come on, we're taking communion." She's like, "I'm a Catholic in my own way." She's like, "I come here to worship God and to talk to God. So just do that. Don't worry about, what they say." So, she taught me very early on to kind of have this spirit of paying attention to what felt right to us and to me. But I was always envious of my dad growing up, because sometimes on special Sundays, we'd go to the French Quarter, to the big cathedral there. And after like 5 minutes, my dad was allowed to leave and go hang out in the French Quarter, and I had to stay. So that was always difficult for me. But I did grow up I went to a Catholic high school, and from 7th grade on, So I was around the Catholic tradition. I was confirmed, baptized, all of those sacraments. I can't say that I really understood God or had a connection with God until later. Should I get into that now? Or, I mean, that's probably just answered your question. But.
Go ahead.
So I would say my relationship with God didn't happen until, throughout my life and in college, I had some very difficult experiences that I had to go through. When I got married to Jeff and, had all the things in my life going really well. I went to grad school or decided to go to grad school, came out here to California, but then I started feeling very depressed and sad. And it's like, and anxious. And it's like, why am I feeling that when so much of my life is going really well? And it was really hard for me to understand. I didn't have a relationship with God. I didn't really have a faith. And I just got so, things were so difficult for me internally that finally I got down on my knees, because as Catholics, you know how to get down on your knees, and because that's what you do during the service. And I said, please, God, if you exist, help me to understand you. I want to have a relationship with you. I don't know what that means. I don't know who you are. I just really was like pleading for help. I just want to feel better and have my life feel better. And so it was from that point on that I felt a change, because I feel like I was finally ready to have that internal shift. I was finally more open and in a place of receptivity. So I would say that's when my faith journey began, and that was in my early 30s. So it's interesting that we can grow up with an idea of God and pray to God, but it may not necessarily mean that we have that interior connection yet. So for me, it came out of pain and suffering, even though, again, the externals of my life are going really well. So that's kind of how I started developing that interfaith. But I didn't like going to Catholic Mass, because their perspective on abortion, their perspective on LGBTQ, like all the things that they would say, I'd get offended while I was sitting in Mass a lot of times. And it wasn't so much because they thought differently, but because they assumed everybody in the congregation should think and feel the same. And so I stopped going very early on. But then when I met Jeff and he introduced me to the UCC, that's kind of what got me here, which has been very refreshing to be part of this group.
Yeah, just to fill out that story a little bit, when Stelli and I got married, my ex-wife inherited the church that I was going to. And so, for us to get started, it was kind of a new thing. And during that same time with Stelli, that was the period of time that I decided to go back to seminary, which I had considered when I was 19 years old. So there was kind of a converging of those things in both of our lives. So I'm going to skip to a different question. One of the things that I discovered that was just a revelation to me about Stelli's family was all of the women in the family are so strong and they're so independent. And it's a quality that's hard to describe to people in the United States, because in the United States, we think of women's rights and a lot of the things that have come in the last 50 years for changes for women here. But what I'm talking about, how it's different. So could you describe that as best you can to all of us?
Yeah, I don't know what's different about Nicaragua, but I feel like the women there, the indigenous women, there's a spirit, a strength that's very unique. It's more of a matriarchal culture, even though in politics, it's still very much ruled by men. But like during wartime, the women are there fighting. The women are the strategists. The women have a lot of respect and they have a big role. But then afterwards, when things change, it's like everybody goes back to kind of their place. So in that sense, it's still very patriarchal. But in my family in particular, my mom, her sisters, my grandmother, they have a warrior spirit. They're very dominant. They argue with each other. They're very passionate. Like for me, it was a lot of fun being around that because it never felt scary. It felt very alive. And it's like if somebody was angry, they would like yell and they'd work it out, and then they'd be laughing and crying. So it's just, again, very expressive and very emotional. And the beauty of that to me is like when we were out in the streets or encountering like somebody trying to take advantage of you or steal from you or something, the women would rise up and they would challenge and they would yell or whatever. So it's like this knowing what's right, standing up for what's right, and doing what's right, like really, really kind of coming from that place of a deep knowing. Whereas the culture here and kind of the white side of my family, it's much more kind of proper, and there's a lot of how to describe it, politeness, which is nice, but not always a willingness to stand up and to speak the truth or speak one's own truth in the moment. So for me, I always had that kind of mixed messages about how to be, and I have both strains inside of me. So I'm half Nicaraguan, but I'm a quarter Greek and a quarter Scottish, and so I grew up with these different parts of family members and the ways that they are and being taught different things. And there's a lot of value. Like, I remember being with my great grandmother on the Scottish side, and I must have been chewing with my mouth. I don't know what, but she taught me to have manners and like how to eat and like how to, I don't know. She was just very big on table manners. And so, everybody kind of has the things that are important to them that they teach you. But on the Nicaraguan side, it was definitely this strength, this fiery passion, and just ability to stand up for yourself and to have your voice. And for women in particular, I think that's extremely important.
So this is kind of a continuation of what you've been talking about, but you and I speak frequently about what it means to be a bicultural person and the way that those things come together in your life. And that's why I chose the reflection today, because I think there's a certain kind of perspective that comes when we move in and out of each culture. Like when we travel to Nicaragua, it's like my life changes, and I see that, and the same for you. And then when we come back and we see everything here in a different way too. So could you expand on that?
I mean, there's so much to unpack here with this topic. Just to kind of back up a little bit, I just wanted to share, like when I was younger, I didn't like the fact that my mother had, her skin is probably 3 shades darker than mine. She speaks with an accent. She spoke to me in Spanish growing up, and it was very embarrassing to me. And I used to say, please don't speak to me in Spanish in front of my friends. And my whole life she spoke to me in Spanish, and I always responded in English. I used to tell people my name was Amy or Stacy or something like some American name. And one day a little kid knocked on the door looking for, I think it was Amy. And she's like, hey, there's no Amy here. And it happened a couple of times. She's like, so finally she asked me, she's like, are you telling people your name is Amy? And I'm like, yeah. And so we had a lot of those kinds of experiences where I really wanted to be like everybody else, which was very white, and I could pull on that a little bit because my father was white and that side of my family was. So I did a lot of like devaluing of my mother and whatever her rules were or her ideas were, pretty much until I would say through high school even. So it wasn't until later in life, I think I was traveling to Nicaragua with Jeff, and we were on the plane and flying over, and I just started bawling because I just realized like I missed my country, I missed the culture. I was starting to really feel what I had cut off in myself, and I think that was the turning point where I really started to value what Jeff's talking about, and then seeing through his eyes, because he was so happy to be there and so happy with the energy of my family and the way they so kind of like meet you in a very forward way, and they're excited and happy just because he's connected to me. They're happy, that I have somebody that I care about and who cares for me. So to his point, like when we're there and there's just this energy and this feeling, like I feel very much myself when I'm in Nicaragua, like because I'm in touch with my emotional self. As soon as I come here, I feel like I go into my more intellectual kind of reasoning side of me, and there's a disconnect because it's like living in 2 different parts of yourself. Like here, I have to have reasons and explanations for why I do what I do. Everything has to make sense. There, it's like nothing makes sense. And if anything, I don't know, people have a flow, even the way they move through traffic or move through life. It's like they just kind of go with the flow. There's more of an intuitive sense of things. So I don't know, you just have to get used to both. So there's definitely an adjustment. Did I answer your question?
Yeah. So I feel like really good things are coming out of what you're saying now. That's helpful to see you. But I still sometimes feel like there's parts of you that I see that I would love everybody to see. And they kind of come out. It's kind of unfortunate in a way that we've had the pandemic, because I feel like I'm still learning who all of you are, and still, getting to know this congregation. And here it is, over 2 years since I started. So I kind of am realizing how I'm missing out on some of that. And the other side of that is how much everybody else is missing out on you. What is it that you would want everyone here to know about you that they don't know?
Besides the fact that I'm getting a puppy in a few weeks,
Right.
which I'm very excited about because it's the first time ever having a dog. I would say that I really value your stories and my own story. Like, I think there's nothing more important than honoring our history and our past. And that includes where we come from, things that have happened to us, like our whole journey, our family, our ancestors. I think those stories are so very important, and they live in us in this moment. And I think when we meet each other and we're here face to face, we just talk about either superficial things or what's going on right now, which that's fine too. That's important. But I don't know how we get to that other place where we can honor those stories. And for me, like, I'm spending a lot of time in my personal life writing down my history, writing down my stories, writing down my memories and my experiences, and really trying to feel and understand, why is it that I feel this way now? Why is it that I think this way and I am this way? Really, like, studying that. Like, I feel like that's so important to do that work. And I'm interested in doing that work for myself, but also in hearing your stories. And if you're interested in sharing that in whatever capacity, I mean, I don't know how we do that, right? Like, it's a hard thing to just meet at coffee hour and share your life story or unpack a bunch of things. But I don't know, for me, like, why not? Like, why can't we find ways to do that? Like, that's it's so rich. It's so important. Like, there's nothing more important than that. I mean, who cares what you do for a living? I mean, that's cool, but who cares? I mean, who are you? Like, what makes you feel the way you feel? Like, why do you have that perspective? That to me is really fascinating and interesting and important.
And I think that having a sense of yourself as a healer and having Red Sulphur as a place that's open for people for that kind of thing is probably the other part of that that's the most public part. But thank you for sharing that, and thank you for agreeing to let me interview you.